my interpretation of what this entails might be completely different what it says on the tin, but I'm hoping to get some discussion, some input, and some interaction from you and hearing your views because the presentation is called A Disabled Colleague, Preconceptions, Obstacles, and Opportunities. And I can say hand on heart, I've seen all of that. Okay, so I'll be very interested to hear your views and thoughts as we go through together for the next 20 minutes. So, where do we go from here? So, what we're going to do, I'm going to start by asking you some questions, really, some polls where I'd like your input on, your thoughts. And then I actually also have a Padlet, which I'm hoping we can spend a few minutes on to input later. We're going to talk about the positives and the challenges from my experience working with disabled colleagues. And yeah, that's been interesting. And I'll leave you with a final question. What will you do going forward in this field? So without further ado, let's start by doing a poll. So if you can see at the top, there is a website called responseware.eu. Okay, can everyone see that? If you go to that website and you put in this session suitably appropriate, hopefully there will pop up a question for you. And this is completely anonymous, by the way. So I have no idea who is answering what question. So, okay. So if you can get logged in, then hopefully that should be okay. And it's a very straightforward question. Do you work with a disabled colleague? Now, the answers might not be so straightforward. It can be yes, they can be no. Not me personally, but other colleagues do. Or possibly with someone with a non-visible disability, but I'm not really sure. Okay. So this is how we start to set the scene. And this is interesting because we probably come from very different experience in this field, which might shape our preconceptions about what it's like. So,
Can I ask a question? I
yeah,
don't know how to quite phrase this. If someone was had a sort of long-term illness
yeah.
that that meant that they couldn't always work unexpectedly, would that be a disability or?
I would say so because it's something, it might be a hidden disability, something underlying that we wouldn't necessarily know about. And this comes down to all these preconception and the myths around, what people are willing to talk about and share as well. As we will discuss, there are some disabilities that are visible and others that are not. So this is why the last answer there, possibly, but I don't know,
Mhm.
so that's the other bit. But I've seen we've got quite a few responses. So let's see what we've got here. If I can get this sorted, I need to move everyone away. So this is interesting. So yeah, some of you that definitely work with people with disability. Now, I'd like to know what is that a physical disability? Is that a non-visible disability? Because this is interesting in contrast that you think you may have worked with someone that has a disability, but you're not sure. So the first line out here is, why do you think they have a disability? Okay, and I'm opening this up for question. Versus those of you who are sure, you have definitely worked with a colleague that has a disability. And that leads into your question as well, Paolo, of, well, how do you define that disability? So open up. What's your thoughts? What makes you think you may have worked with someone that has a non-visible disability? Because this comes down to a bit of preconception, doesn't it? And this is not judging anybody. This is a free, safe space to just share these ideas and thoughts.
It's uh, it's funny. Sometimes I've worked with people with dyslexia
Mhm.
or ADHD, self-declared, and sometimes they've been some of my strongest colleagues. Uh,
The neurodiversity benefit, isn't it?
yeah, sometimes
Mm.
yeah, for what they're doing, it really works.
You're on mute. Sorry.
I think it's quite interesting is a lot of that a sense about neurodiversity as opposed to other hidden types of disability. I would be quite interested actually to unpick that non-visible disability into kind of maybe broad categories potentially.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point, because do you see things differently if it's a visible disability versus a non-visible disability? And that's also one question to put out there of how you approach that. Okay. So unless anyone has any immediate thoughts on that, I will push through, because my next question is, what type of disability have you encountered? Okay. So this is again coming down to that. What do I think I've encountered? What's self-declared? What can I see? What do I perceive that, maybe acting slightly differently to what I would have possibly expected or not expected? And I appreciate that several of you said you may or may not have worked with someone with a disability, which is what makes this a bit of a grey area. So I'm going to put it out there. I worked with a wheelchair based colleague. So it's a clear, visible disability. And I have a lot of experience from that.
I've worked with people who've self-declared as ADHD, dyslexia, and people with long-term illness, which has either meant they can work most of the time, but not always, but also people who have been off for long-term periods.
Yeah, and that obviously then may have the preconception of, I was talking at a conference yesterday about people selectively not choosing to collaborate with people that might be going off on sick leave more frequently.
Yeah, there's a comment. I'm just looking at the chat.
Oh, sorry, I can't see the chat. Yeah.
No, don't worry. That's kind of I feel that's my job. Joe's just would you like to share your comment, Joe, just in the chat about your experience of supporting someone with a non-visible disability and how it's made you think? Or
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think it's just sort of made us more aware that potentially people might have disabilities that they either don't want or don't need to share or don't feel comfortable sharing. So for people who haven't read the chat, like my husband's recently been diagnosed with MS, and kind of to look at him or to sort of interact with him, you would never know. And so I think it's just that it really made us kind of consider that other people that I interact with, both staff and students, may well have and kind of need, I don't know, adjustments and things like that, but might not feel kind of confident sharing that just yet if it's a very sort of new diagnosis.
Yeah, no, and that's a fair point. And it's again that, visible. And it's interesting that what we put in here and what I've maxed, is the visible kind of thing where you directly can see it versus what you need to inquire a little bit more about, which you may only find out from a longer extended period having spent with this colleague. So we seem to have, it's interesting there to see that there's been some experience of working with physically disabled of some form, but also some of the other more neurodiverse with ADHD, dyslexia, which seems to be more common these days. Now, the following question, I now want to know, what type of work do you do with your disabled colleagues? And I alluded to earlier that one conversation that came up yesterday was, well, and this was actually more basic. This person's going to go off on maternity leave, so we probably avoiding collaborating with that person. Is there, these kind of pre-assumptions of certain things? So I am interested to know, what type of work does your disabled colleagues do? Are they researchers? Are they teachers? Are they support staff? And this is focusing on your colleagues now. Because again, there is this preconception sometimes about that the people with certain disabilities can only perform certain roles. And I'd like to hear what your experience is. Okay, so we've got a mixture. Go ahead, Paolo. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, have you closed it?
I have. Sorry, I was quick
Okay.
on the mark, but do chip in. I just try to get through a few things, but go ahead.
Oh, I don't think I can answer now.
No, I don't think, but you can verbally share
Oh,
with
okay,
us.
sorry. Oh well, I hadn't thought. Well, I was, yeah. I mean, I have IT colleagues. I mean, particularly UX consultants, um, workshop facilitators. Well, yeah, and workshop coordinators.
Okay, so it seems to be a mixture between admin and academic staff. Okay, and I think this is interesting because often it's less talk about amongst academic staff, and between admin staff it seems to be more of an open discussion, but we'll come back to that in a second. Now, just throwing it out there, and this is about comments. What is your perception and experience of in your place of work and their approach to inclusivity? What do you think are the largest obstacles to inclusion in your place of work? And this you can put in the chat actually if you don't want to talk about it. So I can tell from my side, one of the largest obstacles, budget. We can't afford to pay for an assistant, or it's going to cost us more money. We will not necessarily initially support a disabled colleague who travel with an assistant because we don't want to pay for two people. Okay. Can we teach in this room? Is there enough space? So what's your experience? And how do you think your place of work is approaching it? Okay. Okay, so there's sometimes that's interesting, Ben. So is that kind of middle of the ground of people not necessarily knowing how to, I guess, define you or treat you, and thereby comes with his own more questions possibly than actually asking. People have a lot of questions, but I find often people are afraid of asking because they're afraid of offending. So I don't know, Ben, what's your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's about offending actually at all. It's either if not in the wheelchair, then they just forget they have to make any particular changes. So it's like, no, I can't use this office space or get to there or what have you. And there then is sometimes a problem where I did have my previous boss, shall we say, said that it would be so much easier for them if I was in the wheelchair all the time, because then they would know what to do, and my chair moves with me, as opposed to any sort of other special arrangements that they could do.
Trying to keep a clean face, but
yes,
I'm
exactly,
telling you, it's like,
wow. I've told that story various times, and actually over the past few years, you can see the reaction changes over time as well. Now it gets that reaction, whereas before it was like, oh no, well yeah, I could see it would be.
So you're only allowed to be disabled sometimes, yeah? That'd be
yes,
more convenient.
It's more convenient if you have exactly the same level of ability all the time, and then we'll know how to deal with you. Yeah, and that's it. Right. So that's So I think that's, as I say, it's about an attitude rather than about an alteration. Because most of the time, I find that where you explain what you need and somebody agrees with it, most of the time then they stick with it, as long as they are able to as long as it doesn't interfere too much with what they want to do. then sometimes it does start to cause some problems, but I've been like this for a while, and so my attitude now is, if it causes too many problems, then I get in touch with HR and they fix it very, very quickly.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, I'm reading through the chat here that this is very easy to talk, but then to walk, and the fact of that you know, they're just not the open conversations about it. That surprised me to still hear that that's the case. I'm glad to hear NTU, they were accommodating and they thought about it. Do we find that we think there are certain disabilities that are easier to cater for those people around us, or do we feel that there is just a general lack of not knowing what to do? A lack of awareness, as Claire said. Any thoughts on that? What have we got here? Classroom accessible.
You're on mute.
Sorry, Ellen, I think you've made some quite interesting comments about mental health issues. If you'd like to kind of bring that into the discussion on this whole, just around this feeling of people maybe not being sure what to do.
Yeah, I think it, when you have sort of when staff experience mental health issues that are either caused by or exacerbated by workload issues, the institution are perhaps a bit more fingers in their ears about it. Whereas I think and particularly it depends on when your disability or your mental health issue comes on. Like if you arrive in a new role, declaring that versus if it comes on, I think there's probably a difference of experience there. But I think we see lots. I think you see lots of people on long-term sick across the HE sector due to mental health issues that are either caused by or exacerbated by workload issues. And I don't think that's openly talked about, because obviously that's a lot more of a challenging topic of conversation.
Of no, I agree. And I think that is very interesting. It's kind of that almost not pushing responsibility around, but kind of, how can you be so certain it's from this, and not something else? So I hear you. I think, I'm going to read through all of this chat again because there's some very interesting comment there. I would like, if possible, there is a Padlet here. Let me see if I can actually put that in the chat. And oh, sorry, that was kind of, you can either if you want to put in the Padlet or if you put in the chat group, I don't mind. But what I basically want to understand is, what do you see as the benefits and the challenge of having disabled colleagues for students? Yeah. For the support staff, we concluded we probably had 50-50 academic and support staff that you work with that have some form of disability. And my experience is that the positives and the challenges are actually quite different for what the students perceive, what the support admin perceive, and what the academic staff perceive. So let me see if I can, hold on. Can I pick it up from there? I can't. Bear with me. Let's see if I can just pick up the Padlet. And oops, sorry. And I would very much welcome if anyone wants to, can you see that?
Yeah, the Padlet has appeared in the chat, yeah.
Yeah.
So
and we can even post if you want to continue putting on that there, I'd be delighted. But basically, what the Padlet is looking for, what are the challenges and what are the positives? And I will share with you what my experience is whilst you possibly have a go at the Padlet. So as I mentioned, just mindful of time, I work with a wheelchair-based tutor that works with me. And this is the feedback from students that is very much positive with diversity inclusion. It makes them very aware. They feel very inspired. There could be the perception bias, though, and the fact that you're in a tight classroom and things that kind of needs to happen quickly, and you need to potentially give space for the wheelchair, and they can't wrapple things together. There's also potentially a stigma around it, not knowing, well, how can they teach us about this? But it does provide and does develop empathy and understanding, which is something that's really hard to teach. So I think that's a real advantage. Now, interesting. Support staff they feel that, yeah, having a disabled colleague is, again, give that culture of inclusion. And, you know, it's good if we follow compliance, we have to follow procedure. And it helps them to think creatively about how to, you know, we have to think about how we accommodate. But there is, again, a little bit of, you know, there are budget implications, there are resource implication. And, you know, are we sure that that's the best person that can do this job? Because it does create a little bit more extra work. Academics, generally, that they have found that it's a very innovative approach. You have to be creative, and critical thinking has often come out in a different manner, and it's opened up collaboration that possibly otherwise would have not been considered. Again, there might be some perception around, you know, integration and physical accessibility, and again, the stigma around it. So again, I'm happily sharing these things. There is my colleague Shrin, who I work with, who is a wheelchair user. And I think what I want to leave you with are the quotes on the right-hand side from our students, which was 10 minutes in, I've forgotten about the wheelchair. I realized that my challenges encountered in my life are so minor. Boy, I will have another attitude when waking up tomorrow morning. So without further ado, I'll leave it as that. I think I'll be with, you know, be excitement looking into the chat. But and anything you want to contribute to the Padlet, etc., by all means, you know, do, and I'll be delighted to hear from you.